Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, professors and students, friends. Today, we are very honored to have our distinguished guests from University of Hong Kong and Melbourne Graduate School of Education, as well as Faculty of Education, ECNU. And we will have the fourth episode of Global Education Deans Forum, series activities of Global Deans perspective on the future education. And now we would like to invite our moderator, Associate Professor Dr. Zhang Li from Faculty of Education, ECNU. And I will leave the floor to Dr. Zhang. Let's welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Cho. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. And it's my great honor and pleasure to be the moderator here. I'm eagerly looking forward to our 1 hour dialogue. So let me first introduce our distinguished Dean speaker today, Professor Yang Rui from the University of Hong Kong. And as a graduate from Faculty of Education at the University of Hong Kong, I feel very excited at this moment to introduce our faculty dean. Hello, and a warm welcome to you, Professor Yang. Hello, Professor Yang.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. We are also very honored and pleased to have our 2 discussants here today. They are Ms. Carmel Mesiti, PhD student and lecturer at Melbourne Graduate School of Education, Australia. Also, we have Dr. Christopher T. McCaw, lecturer from Melbourne Graduate School of Education. Warmly welcome. Also, welcome
Very much for having us today.
Yeah, welcome. Welcome to our GEDF deans, professors, colleagues, and our fellow students online. So the dialogue series have really provided us with a very good opportunity to have a chance to make exchanges to promote our thinking on our interest in promoting practices and research in faculties of education in the global world. So today we are very glad to have our 4th dialogue in this series. As usual, we will have 3 sections. First, Professor Yang will give us a speech. And second, we will have a dialogue between Professor Yang and our 2 discussants. And finally, we will have some time for Q&A and for the audience. So now I'm sure that everyone have been very eager to listen to Professor Yang's speech. Please join me in welcoming Professor Yang to give us a speech. His talk is entitled Faculties of Education in an Era of Uncertainty, Global Aspirations and Local Footings. Please, Professor Yang.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Zhang. And also I want to thank East China Normal University, colleagues in East China Normal University, in particular, Professor Shen Shuangye, and Chu Yue, for giving me this opportunity to interacting with our colleagues. I also want to, very pleasant to meet Carmel and Chris. My family actually are in Melbourne. I'm in Hong Kong alone for over 10 years. So I'm a Melbourneian. This is opportunity for me. So you will notice I'm talking about my own faculty, my struggle, our concerns, and how we plan to survive in this fairly tough environment, both domestically and also globally. So I will focus more on the faculty, and more generally as a Faculty of Education, rather than teaching and learning or research alone. Also welcome and nice to meet online colleagues and students. I hope we can have nice interaction shortly after my presentation. I will try to be brief. As Dr. Zhang mentioned, I'm talking about faculties of education, but I will focus on my own faculty as an example. Not necessarily a good example. Well, it is a good example, not necessarily always successful experience. But it's real, our struggles and challenges. Just briefly, my talk, I will rely heavily on Furlong and Lorne, their work over 10 years ago, and also some work done by Professor Furlong and Whitty, again, about 12 years ago. They focus on, they publish books on disciplines of education, and also they look at how education is researched in different societies. In their book, they look at faculty education as a field of study, the development of this field of education, and they call this sociology, psychology, history, and philosophy of education. Indeed, both Melbourne University and East China Normal University, and also my own faculty, our faculty of education, our faculties of education or graduate school of education is bigger than sociology, psychology, history, and philosophy. We have ICT, we have many others. But largely in the UK, we call this, I have this in as my slide because I really want to show people actually understand education as a field of study differently. In terms of practice, again, very much different. We do this very differently. So in the UK, largely called disciplines of education. And in the did I say US? UK, disciplines of education. In the US, mainly foundations. We often say foundations of education. In the mainland of China, the Chinese mainland university usually called pedagogy, 教育学科, or 教育科学, education science. Indeed, I don't have it here, but indeed, major teacher training institutions on the mainland, Chinese mainland, called Faculty of Education. East China Normal, Beijing Normal, and also, for example, Dongbei 是吧, Northeast Normal. But there are universities called education science, like Nanjing Normal University, they call School of Education Science. This kind of difference show how we understand education differently. And that different understandings have huge implications for how we do education. How can I get rid of this? Okay. I want to emphasize similarity and differences. This is very, very interesting because we are increasingly subject to similar, if not the same, factors. For example, publications in which, where you publish. You publish article with what kind of publishers or journals, and that has huge, as younger, particularly junior researchers, you pay so much attention to this, whether it's important journals or top journals. That's very much emphasized by our institutions these days. So we tend to have a short list of journals, and that usually is English journals in the UK, in the United States, and some in Australia and Canada. Not many other countries, very few in Japan, almost none in Korea, almost none in China. So even the Chinese academics in the Faculty of Education need to publish it in the same journals. Okay, they are under huge pressure to do this. And with this, of course, we have others. We subject to paradigms, similar or the same paradigms, using the same standards. So we are subject increasingly to the same external factors. They're not really global. They are mainly Western, but not really global. They are mainly Anglo-Saxon, not really Western. It's more Anglo-Saxon. These factors, on one hand, I think has huge impact on the way we work, on one hand. So forcing us to be the same or similar, that's one, very powerful. On the other hand, we need to be different. We actually look for differences because I said, my dot point 3, it is difference that really makes a difference. It is that kind of difference serves our local society, and therefore we should aim at those differences. So on one hand, we are becoming increasingly similar. We actually try to be similar. I'm going to emphasize later. If you want to be ranked highly, if you want to be a respect scholar individually, you have to be similar or if not the same. On the other hand, if you want to serve your society, schools, your society, you have to be specific. You have to be locally relevant. You have to be different on the other hand. It is that difference really makes a difference. So I quote here Furlong and Whitty said, both the existence and the character of the field of education have been contested within and between countries ever since it first entered the university in the late 19th century, and the intensity of what contestation has created markedly in recent years. So the difference, I think the difficult part is how, as an individual or as a faculty of education, how you strike a balance, a nice balance between being different, being similar or the same. And that's actually very difficult for a faculty, and also for an individual. My own faculty, I think people know, it's embarrassing to say this, but I have to say, when we analyze my own faculty, it has always been ranked very highly. In the last faculty review by international panel, this is what the panel described the faculty, the widely acknowledged as one of the world's leading faculties of education. So recognition, including academic judgment by international peers, awards, and collaboration, as well as performance in ranking systems. So we are consistently, for a long time, ranked highly in all global schemes, ranking schemes. And also this is what I always emphasize, no matter you believe this or not, and we are the best ranked faculty of education from a non-Western society. I think this is important. This shows what? This shows the University of Hong Kong Faculty of Education is very similar to what is practiced in those countries, and particularly UK, America, Australia, and Canada. These countries, we are very similar to them. To put it another way, we are very international, if not Western, the most Western among all non-Western societies. Our practice with this similarity is demonstrated in almost every aspect of our life. Teaching, theory, practice, every aspect of our work here. You can criticize it and say, okay, you are very Western. Indeed, the intellectual mind here is almost entirely Western. And the Chinese element, personally as dean, I'm actually new dean, not 1 year yet. I want to incorporate the Chinese element or the East Asian elements. I think it's very, very important. But actually, it's not easy to incorporate this part. Because globally, I'm going to talk about this briefly, globally, formal education is Western. So globally, academics in our field, education, their intellectual mind is Western. The way they think, when they become rational, they are similar, if not the same, as the Western peers. This is not a criticism. This is a description of the current situation. Only when they become more emotional, they are more Korean or Chinese or Japanese. So we face, as a faculty, we face huge challenges. I think our peers in different countries would have sympathy, feel quite similar, yeah, if not the same. On the international level, we do suffer from the geopolitics, the tensions between China and the US-led West. This has a direct impact on the way we do our work on a daily basis. We, as dean, I feel increasingly difficult to recruit good people because their understanding of Hong Kong, the current situation, is often not the reality. It's very much distorted and to a great extent misperceived. Hong Kong has been misperceived. On the society level, we also suffer. Hong Kong school-aged population is shrinking very quickly, very quickly. That means as a faculty of education, we get a quota from the government, and the quota becomes every year smaller and smaller. Another issue I need to mention is more and more Hong Kong teachers are migrating overseas. So they are leaving schools. And we are in a very difficult situation and very difficult to predict what the future will be, even the near future. On the institutional level, I think this is also quite similar globally. But Hong Kong University of Hong Kong is a good example. We are experiencing an I call unprecedented bias towards science and technology. That means education education has always been fairly marginalized, except university like East China Normal, you are lucky, or Beijing Normal, you are lucky. Other universities, education faculty, in comparison with medicine, law, and others, often we are marginalized. But that situation currently at my workplace is, I think, unprecedented. That's a huge challenge to us. I also want to mention this in particular, aging academics. I remember in 2016, I think, I attended the CIS in Vancouver, and I also visited the University of Vancouver, British Columbia, with my dean. At that time, I was associate or assistant dean, I can't remember. And the dean there at UBC mentioned, I think at that time, one third of their staff, academic members, were over 60. That was 10 years ago. Oh, well, no, 10 years, 16. That was nearly 10 years ago. So, and this situation described by Furlan and Lorne, say in the UK, academics were in their late 50s, but that was the work was written at least in 2010. So now 12 years later, most people over 60, many I think approaching 70. So we are having globally, I think, aging academics, but that is a specific major challenge to us because University of Hong Kong, only University of Hong Kong, even different from other institutions in Hong Kong, our leaders stick to the compulsory, almost compulsory retirement age at 60. So we have very small pool to, when we try to recruit globally, we have very, very small pool. And also because of this 60 as retirement age, people are not willing to come because they can only work for a few years, particularly when we look for professors at that level. They are already in their 50s. They only have a few years to work. And while in contrast, in other universities, in other countries, Australia, Canada, United States, United Kingdom, they don't have compulsory retirement age. So this is a huge challenge for us, for me, as dean of this faculty. Let me try to just briefly to say how I try to strike a balance, what I call strategic balance. One is local and global. We do have a few people very global, but not local enough, not locally relevant enough. We do have people, many people, they are very local, but they cannot publish globally. What I really want is to build a world-leading faculty of education, but at the same time, this faculty is locally relevant, locally responsible, locally important. Okay, I do believe there is a nexus between the local and global, and local issues can have global significance. But you have to be familiar with both discourses, and this is a particular challenge for non-Western societies, people, because the discourse, the academic discourses could be very different and influenced by many different factors. And if you want to have both, then it's fairly difficult. Therefore, many people have good data, but they cannot publish globally. Another issue is continuity and change. We have been known for quite a few traditional areas like language education, science and mathematics education. Chinese learner is Hong Kong U particularly famous for that. The cultural dimension I call of learning and teaching. And also we are well known for education in Chinese societies. I want to maintain these. At the same time, we want to incorporate new developments like AI and neuroscience into our traditional strengths like science of learning. So, and it's easy to say, it is very difficult to do, but it seems we have to do that. theoretically, let's talk about different traditions. And I quote Furlong and Whitty substantially here, is I want to emphasize the differences. They mention the most significant thing that we have identified in this survey, based on the survey that published books, is a very diversity of different traditions. I really want to emphasize one, that different traditions means one, education is done differently based on different understanding. Also, because these different societies have different intellectual traditions, and these two are interrelated, but they are different. I'm good because I'm going to focus a little bit more on intellectual tradition, so I want to point this out. The great potential of different intellectual traditions have not been taken seriously enough globally. And I personally think this is where we can make some noise on the global arena. We can make a difference there. So I really want to emphasize, but I want to quote, I want to cite Furlong and Whitty to support me. They say by rendering those different traditions visible, and we can make a difference. And I strongly agree with that. So in terms of this, is actually a small piece published by East China Normal University Review, invited by Professor Chen Chuangye. I just want to emphasize East Asia intellectual traditions are there and strong and good, but they have not been incorporated, in particular, in the study of education. We need to do that so that we can contribute to the global intellectual pluralism. And if you look at, as I mentioned, if you look at globally, faculties of education, the intellectual mind has remained to be almost entirely Western. And this is not a criticism, but this is not good enough. I think particularly for faculties like us, and we are located in non-Western society, we have both, so we can contribute to enrich the global studies of education. But in reality, this is rarely, this is not achieved yet, let me put it simply. And I call this is like a specter haunting us for at least over a century. And it is still there. It is still, the specter is still there haunting us. To combine tradition with modernity to bring together China and the West, this is a strong slogan. This is a mission of the Chinese University of Hong Kong when the New Asia College was established, later become part of Chinese University of Hong Kong. And if you look at the practice, we haven't entirely, this mission has not been accomplished yet entirely. But we are in a good position, I call, to change from tears to cheers, because we have been forced, East Asia, Japan, Korea, other Chinese societies like Hong Kong and Taiwan too, let alone mainland China. We have been forced to learn in order to survive. We have been forced to learn the West. And therefore, we have been trying so hard. The achievement is we have learned Western learning, Western knowledge fairly well. That's why these societies have achieved so much. If you look at Japan, look at Korea, look at Hong Kong higher education, Taiwan, and the mainland, it's indeed very extraordinary, hugely impressive. But that's not good enough. We need to incorporate the East Asian traditions so that we can contribute more to the global community. We are indeed fairly fortunate. Our alumni, supporters have been taking pains to rebuild this mixed tradition. We have always had the mix of Western and Chinese, or East Asian, present and past. But the mix has rarely been set right. And I think today, with the economic development, with the general development of East Asian societies, we are in a good position to get the mix correct. I want to stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Yang. Thank you.
Let me
so
stop
much,
share.
For your presentation, very insightful and very provoking, especially as a dean of this top Faculty of Education, share with us very good examples of a Faculty of Education of University of Hong Kong, and let us know the challenges, the 3 challenges faced by Faculty of Education, and also the 2 measures, global and local, and also other good measures. Thank you very much indeed, and also call for us to integrate or incorporate between combine West and China, and also the integration of tradition and modernity. Thank you. And also I learned a lot. So as a moderator, I will not take too much time. I now hand over the reins to our 2 discussants, Ms. Carmel Mesiti and Dr. Chris McCaw. So Ms. Carmel, what's your opinions, and do you have any questions to Professor Yang?
Thank you very much. And again, thank you for inviting me to participate today. That was a very, very interesting presentation, Professor Yang, particularly because I've been involved in an international project called the International Classroom Lexicon Project. And one of the partners is Beijing Normal University. And my work has been in maths education, and I've been involved with 10 communities worldwide that have been challenging this notion that English, being the language, the international language of research and knowledge, and that it is this lingua franca of research. We as a community, as an international community, we agree that there are constructs in different communities that have not been identified because of that barrier of the English language. So the project that I've been involved in documented the language of teachers in the language that they use to talk about the classroom in the language of the community. So we have a volume now that has 10 countries, and we've documented the Chinese lexicon of teaching practice. Now, what I want to just quickly say about the Chinese lexicon is that it's really extensive, like it's very, very detailed, and there's so many constructs about the classroom, and we don't have this language to describe the classroom in English. So our maths teachers don't use the same words that the Chinese teachers use, that the Japanese teachers use, that the Korean teachers use, the French teachers, and so on. And in fact, the English language that we have in Australia is not as sophisticated as particularly the Chinese one and the Japanese one. And we think this is a way of recognizing, like you're saying, that East Asian intellect by learning about these terms and comparing them with ours. And we don't feel it's a comparison as in to say which is better or not, but it's really to expand our local terminology. So I really just needed to tell you that, just to say that what you were saying really aligns with the work that I've been doing. But there's not a question in there, but I do have one question, and it was about, this retirement age of 60 seems to be really, really problematic. We have a problem with our workforce in Australia in that it's casual. And I think this might be a global problem as well. Yeah. So I guess, given that, how do faculties of education maintain the quality of its programs, given, number one, its workforce is aging and increasingly disconnected in our case? So is there a change? Can there be a change to the retirement age? What's the solution for now? And thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to engage with you and ask a question.
Thank you, Carmel. I think people, including Dr. Zhang, and including Chris, I think people like you are lucky, because of the labor market. If you look at the academics age. In fact, more than 10 years ago, I read some documents produced by Canadian government. They expect a huge shortage of future, at that time they say future academics, because it takes a decade to train academic. And so people like you are really well placed. But for the society, for Hong Kong, for example, it's almost stupid. I just to stick to retirement age at 60. It's just not wise enough. And the correct thing is to raise it, although the French people are protesting. But I think in general, I think academics, particularly in education. I remember I mentioned this to Philip Ortbach in Boston College about Hong Kong youth policy, retirement at 60. He laughed. He said 60 in our field, he's a big guru in comparative education. He said 60 is a baby. 60 is a baby. So, but 65 is our peak time. In our field, people produce best work. So, and we have to invite these people to come back and continue to work for us. But at the moment, it's not the policy, and particularly this university, and it creates huge problem for us. But I noticed, Carmel, you mentioned casual people. It is an issue, and it is a particular issue in Latin America, because there universities tend to have an overwhelming proportion of casual teachers. So a university professor can drive taxi at the same time. And that will affect, although it is not politically correct to say, casual people, usually, too many casual people will not, we cannot guarantee the quality because we have too many. But the reality is because they have to do different work and they cannot concentrate, so that will affect it. So, but in the future, I think increasingly, as an administrator, managing this faculty, I realize I need to hire more people on a casual basis. So hopefully, at the moment, we are doing okay because we hire retired people. We also hire retired teachers and principals from the frontier. So they actually know the business fairly well. How we do this with an aging population in most of these societies, I think it's a big challenge. It's beyond us. I think we need to watch this carefully, but I take your point. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do you have more questions, Ms. Carmel?
I do, but I'll pass on to Chris and we'll take some time.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Professor Yang. Thank you, Carmel. So do you have any question, Dr. Chris, or comments or opinions?
Yeah, thank you so much for the speech, Dean Yang. There was many points that sparked a lot of interest for me. I think probably in my reflections, I'd focus on these questions of knowledge and of different cultural traditions of knowledge, and probably make two remarks, and I guess you can respond to either of those. My particular research work has been looking at the use of meditation practices by teachers, and that connects to this whole field of contemplative education, and there's a rise of interest in things like mindfulness and so forth as a curriculum for social emotional learning. I'm thinking about schools here because I'm a teacher educator by trade. But it strikes me that in a way is a really interesting intersection point between Western knowledges and knowledges that are deeply Indian, Chinese, Japanese in origin. And no doubt there's some really interesting hybridization and translation going on as these are reaching into the sort of global sphere. But I actually see that as a really interesting point of dialogue between Western academic knowledge and spiritual and philosophical traditions from the East. So I'm interested in whether that meeting point is one that you think is fruitful, or whether you're thinking of something quite different. Well, maybe I can pose that question to see, so you think that potential is there in a sort of contemplative education or space.
Thank you, Chris. I had a little bit of problem towards the end when you phrase your question,
sure.
But largely I think I get it. Different traditions. I just mentioned someone called Reagan, I think, published a book called Non-Western Education Traditions. You can easily Google, and my student can get even free copy on the internet. I never could, but and the book quickly became a huge success, a star, written by American education researcher, professor. I think his family name is Reagan. Non-Western educational traditions, something like that. But that book is really, really helpful, but very superficial, because within one book, you talk about, say, 8 major traditions. That's very ambitious. But on the other hand, it's a wonderful introduction, to different traditions. We do need to pay more attention to different traditions. We only have one tradition at the moment. As I mentioned in my talk, formal education is Western. Formal education became Western in China in last century, beginning of last century, 1919, May 4th movement. After that, quickly changed entirely into, and this means what? This means in non-Western societies, if you are educated, your intellectual mind is actually Western. The problem is people do not always realize that. So and for many people, it's problematic, because when you try to think, when you try to be rational, you are using Western approaches, Western way of thinking, binary thinking in particular. In reality, you also, you still need to live in that society. And often the curriculum, the curriculum, the formal school curriculum, and the real life, the huge gap between them. In Australia, we also, in the UK, in the United States, it's common to see a gap between curriculum, between theory and practice. But that gap is much, much wider in non-Western societies, say in China or Japan. So what you learn in classroom cannot be easily applied, even in the corridor. And that's a common experience. That's partially why Chinese kids try to recite, therefore provide correct answers. The correct answer is actually often is not in line with the social reality. That's the funny part, but that's a serious issue. In Australia, let me say a few words about Australia. I think Australia is extremely, University of Melbourne, for example, Graduate School of Education, is really, really well positioned to make some breakthroughs in this aspect, because I'm Australian, so I say, because in Australia, we have basically all people, people from all societies, and with different traditions, strong. Chris mentioned the Indian tradition, Japanese, Korean. We do have wonderful intellectuals, Japanese and Korean, working in Australian universities, but they are not really contributing in terms of this. It's not because of them, it's because they are not well used. Because our system, the Australian formal system, is only Western and only Anglo-Saxon, actually. That's a huge loss, because we have these resources there. We never really use them. I think, but at the same time, Australian population getting so multicultural, and we have Indian, we have Chinese, we have Korean people everywhere, and they are learning, that British mode of curriculum, and we all know the familiar story, Aboriginals complain because according to their indigenous tradition, there are at least 5 seasons a year, but the British textbook tell them there are only 4 seasons a year. We all know that. So I think Australia has the resources. If we try hard, we can make some, breakthroughs in that field, in that aspect, and that will be a huge contribution to the global community of educational studies. Thank you, Chris. Let's communicate more in the future.
Yeah, thank you. Would it be possible to follow that up? Because I think, Dean Yang, you've just opened up a really interesting question, which I wanted to bring up, is that Australia has a really interesting situation right now, because I think there is a growing recognition of Indigenous knowledges that is an Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledges as something that should be recognised and understood and celebrated. So the Melbourne Uni strategic plan is talking about place. Our local strategic plan is really, trying to put Indigenous knowledge and knowledge perspectives at the core of what we do. So yes, there are these questions of Western knowledges and Asian knowledges, but also within the Australian context, internally, there's this disruption going on. And I think there's a genuine effort to make this happen, but I think it's very complex politically, because there is this question of commensurability. Okay, without just opposing them in a binary way, there is a question of very different knowledge styles between Western European knowledge traditions and Indigenous knowledge traditions. And something I think we're struggling with is, well, how do we do this in an authentic and not tokenistic way? So, is there in the Chinese or East Asian context, is there any similarity in terms of not just them and us, but internally different knowledge cultures internal to Asia, which are also, creating that complexity?
Absolutely. Of course, that's even more complex. Chris, China is a typical example, but even I think La Trobe University has a Japanese scholar. I mean, by race, she's Japanese, but she's a very fine scholar. I think maybe about 15 years ago, we had a conversation and she complained because people usually think the Japanese race or culture is very homogeneous. Actually, that's not a fact. Even within Japan, seemingly very homogeneous, actually there is a huge diversity within. But China, of course, if you ever travel to China, people are physically different. People from different regions of China are physically different, and north and south, west and east, and religiously different. Food is different, hugely different. So huge diversity. Once I wanted to do some anthropological study to look at the so-called minorities, their educational tradition and legacy, and put together, Caifeng. But would be terribly interesting, That's within China. Within Australia, this is even more. And Chris, you mentioned Indigenous, of course, because we recognize the Indigenous people because we took their land, and so we recognize. But we also need to recognize the Hinduism, what kind of population of potential contribution. Or put it another way, what we can learn from the Hinduism, in order to have a more inclusive or more, a better education anyway. And the Chinese, of course, the Japanese, all these and others. But I just want to emphasize this. I think it's important, epistemologically and theoretically important. Multiculturalism, cosmopolitanism, and inter or cross civilizational dialogue. And they are all beautiful ideas. They are very difficult to implement. They are difficult because, Chris, if you and I talk each other, let's call this cross civilizational, but it will not end in anything substantial. But Chris, if you, let's say, keep working on Hinduism for 10 years, you develop deep and profound understanding yourself. And at the same time, you use this as a frame of reference to watch, to reflect on the Anglo tradition. And then you have a huge dialogue within yourself. So my argument is only when within individuals, the cross-civilizational dialogue or multicultural, then we will have real multiculturalism. So, and that's a huge challenge. And if we have that, I think Australia teachers will be much better facilitated to teach the Chinese community, to interact with the Chinese community. Also, for us to have a better understanding of our own of the traditional Western education tradition. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Professor Yang and Dr. Chris, for the very wonderful discussion. So now is the time for our audience. So do we have any questions for the audience? We can put forward questions. If you have any questions for Professor Yang, or do you have any other opinions? So Do you have any questions? So
I'm happy to ask another question.
Okay,
thank
you. Yeah, please.
In the absence of it, while the audience is still thinking,
Maybe,
Professor Zhang, it was really interesting to hear you explain and illustrate that sort of multicultural thinking within, or, you know, something that would take a really, really long time, where, you know, this is sort of what we aim for, isn't it? To be really immersed in our work and really have reliable and valid results because of that. But at the same time, we have this appetite. Everyone seems to have an appetite for fast findings. And although at the moment, you know, there's the Q1 journal article Holy Grail, you know, it takes a really, really long time for that cycle. But then when you put that against all these online platforms and blogs and commentary articles where they're not being necessarily reputable, but I mean, I think we are challenged in this way. For example, because I'm in maths education, if you get some PISA or TIMS results, you really need to be able to, you know, comment on those fairly quickly. So how do we, you know, it's a really strange phenomena where social platforms can reach a very, very wide audience, but then are not necessarily, you know, checking their findings or checking their facts. So how can faculties or faculties of education and the research that we do remain relevant in this sort of, you know, what is the danger of this phenomena? And how can we remain at the forefront of disseminating findings in a quick way, in a way that meets that appetite? Do you have a comment about that? I'd be really interested.
I certainly, thank you, Carmel. So I certainly feel strongly about what you just said. I'm struggling. As Dean of this faculty, we spend more and more money each year on external relations, you know, and we put stuff on social media and very quickly. And we do pay attention to how people respond to us. More and more money, more and more human and financial resources invested. As a scholar, I'm suffering from that because I try to stay away from my mobile phone for each day for a few hours. It's difficult because, for example, maybe Professor Chen Shuaye send me a message, you know, through WeChat and say, Yang, can you do this? And I have to respond. You know, I need to respond quickly, and I'm expected to do so quickly. But on the other hand, if you look at it, if you play with your mobile phone for easily for an hour or even more, and that's a huge loss of time. And most of the information you get from there, misleading, you know, and not useful, you know, and that costs you a lot of time. At the same time, I feel very contradictory. At the same time, I also benefit from this. YouTube, for example, these days, it's a huge headache on one hand, but it's a great help on the other. Because, for example, it's difficult for younger generation to understand quickly the long and rich Chinese history. But there are so much very rich material. If you go to go to YouTube, and you can get all these. You just listen while you are eating, you know, and you can get a lot. So it's bad and good. It's really, I think we have not figured out the best way to live with this. These are all new phenomena. And also generations, they behave very differently. For me, I have difficulties managing technology. My children, they are much better trained because they grew up with this, you know. So, but overall, I think something is fundamental, and that is, I just mentioned to Chris, if you want to develop a deep understanding of the Chinese tradition or the Hindu tradition, you have to read, and you have to read and think for a long time. And I think those fundamental things we still need to do to maintain quality. and to publish the real work, but we are very much affected, influenced by this new technology. I personally cannot offer the best solution. I'm struggling, but I'm determined to stay away for a few hours from my mobile phone each day. Very difficult.
That sounds like a good strategy.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Yang, and thank you, Ms. Carmel. So I have one question. I'm interested in Professor Yang's talk in relation to the strategic balances. So the first balance is about local and global. So I think as scholars in the universities, everyone will face such question. So what are scholars in Hong Kong U doing towards balance globalization and the localization? So could you please give us some insight and suggestions? Thank you.
Yeah, well, this is I need to do something very much related to this almost every day. To different people, I do differently, but particularly to our younger, including associate professors, particularly those before tenure. It is difficult, but it is, I think, imperative. It is terribly important to manage well local and global. If you don't have local, you are nowhere. You don't feel fulfilled. You will not be, you don't have that feeling. Because if you want to make a difference, if you really want to contribute to your community, you have to be locally relevant, and that can show how, how important you are, whether or not. But on the other hand, if you cannot publish globally, I don't think you will be seen as successful, particularly if you're working in leading faculties of education like Melbourne Graduate School or East China Normal University. So you are expected to publish in the top journals. You can do both, but to do both is really difficult. Most of our people, they are doing okay because, as I mentioned, the faculty has always been ranked very highly. That basically means most of our people publish very well. And when they publish in good journals, but they publish something about Hong Kong and China maybe, but this region largely. So data mainly from Hong Kong or this region, and they publish in English globally. I need to say Hong Kong, my colleagues, among all these East Asian societies, I think their English proficiency is the best. So and they can communicate easily with Melbourne, with New York, people in New York and Glasgow. While East China Normal, most people wouldn't be so, feel so easy. So that's our strength. That's our strength. However, I need to say, we do have people who are very local and produce wonderful stuff in my eyes, but they cannot get promoted. Because of the, I think you understand the system these days. In Melbourne, in Shanghai, in Beijing, in many places, it is the global that has been emphasized so much. But in order to be able to speak globally, I do think you need to have deep understanding of the local. Then you package the local, using the global discourse, scholarly discourse, and to package, to interpret it, to speak to the global. And then you can get publishing there. But I have to say, only our best researchers can manage this very, very well. Most of our people still manage this with great difficulty. I'm also familiar with how education is researched in China. So we can talk more in the future. Most people in the air, they are neither, how to say, their feet not on the ground, and they're not, well, I put it this way, they are not local, but they are not global either. Many of these people are somewhere there in the air, and that's a fairly pity. But very often you see people like that. Another thing, if I may, is to younger researchers, like maybe like you yourself and also Carmel and Chris, you really need to have a bigger bigger picture, try to plan, try to think, and try to build up your own research identity. The identity is built by yourself, but actually recognized by other people. So it's formed by other people about you, but you can deliberately, shape other people's view about you. And you have to have a longer plan by what stage you do what. So therefore you need to consider whether or not I need to apply for ARC. If I apply for ARC, it's a discovery or it's a linkage grant. You see what I mean? You have to be strategic, because you need to consider this time I need certain kind of publication, and I need to work with certain kind of people. And by certain stage, you need to show you are established, and then you apply for tenure, something like that. So you being well, strategic, is it a good word? But anyway, you try to be strategic, try to have a bigger picture and gradually build up your own research identity step by step. If you can work, today's work will be the foundation for tomorrow's work. That's the best way. And try to avoid, today I write something about mathematics education, tomorrow suddenly I write about music education, for example, and that will waste your time and you will not achieve anything at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for your very insightful suggestions. And I think this is very important, especially for our professional development. Maybe there should be some continuity, just like you said, the second strategic balance between continuity and change. So thank you. So thank you very much indeed for your speech, and also very suggestive and very insightful answers. Okay, so we have 3 minutes, and okay, so Ms. Cho, you have, so do you, so for our audience, do you have any other questions? Okay, so I actually have another question. I think the very important point Professor Yang mentioned is about the intellectual traditions for the faculties. So could you please give us some suggestions or comments towards how to promote our intellectual traditions for our faculty members? So how we can combine both Western and Eastern ideas?
Well, this is a big topic.
Very, yes.
Very difficult, but we have to be society specific. Because for the Australian academics, same issue, but in very different forms and taking very different shape. For the people I know in East China Normal or in China, for example, as I mentioned, China entirely gave away its own traditional way of knowledge organization, how they organize. Traditionally, Chinese way of organizing knowledge is 经史子集, right? It's holistic. It's not discipline-based. But since China borrowed the Western system, imported the Western system, and the Chinese people actually, what they call, 不为名, the Harvard professor called loss of memory. What's the English word? It's anyway, it's a kind of a spiritual problem. You lost your memory, okay? The Chinese younger generation, not now, actually for those born in the 1930s, starting from those generation, they don't know, including Dr. Zhang, you and me, myself, we don't really understand our tradition because we never really systematically learned this. And particularly because since 1919, the Chinese language, formal language, changed into a vernacular. Previously it was classical Chinese. Now we cannot read easily classical Chinese. So to put another way, today's Chinese people have difficulties in communicating with their ancestors, Confucius and Mencius, but they have much more ability to communicate with people like Carmel and Chris, with people in the United States because of English. So there's a huge loss there. And therefore, for the Chinese people, I would suggest more urgent is to learn more about their own tradition and then put the tradition together with a dominant Western tradition. I'm not criticizing, say, the dominance of Western tradition. Many people in comparative education criticize so much. That criticism does not help much. It's already globally the reality. And Western civilization is so dominant for its own reason, actually has some good reason. And you have to, on the basis of this, try to incorporate your own tradition. That's the only way. If you sit there complaining all the time, you will never solve any issue. So for the Chinese, I think the most urgent thing for younger generation is try to catch up with the tradition, understand more, and put together with the Western. And then you will realize you understand your own culture better, and you understand Western culture better. And once you understand both, you really know how to act in situations, in schools, in classrooms. You will know how to. You can borrow from the beauty from both, and easily. Usually we only understand one. We don't understand the other. And for the Chinese, they actually do not understand the Chinese. That's the funny part, but that's the sad part, and that's the reality. So I would suggest to answer your question, Dr. Zhang, we really urgently, we need to catch up with, to learn, our own Chinese tradition.
Thank you. Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's an urgent need for young scholars and young people to learn more about Chinese tradition. It is really a very important thing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. So today we have discussed a lot toward localization, globalization, multiculturalism, and integration of modernization and traditional Chinese, and a lot of very interesting things. I think today our dialogue has inspired us to engage in deep reflection on how to promote the development of faculties of education in the world. So, but time is almost up. So today I'm very happy to be here with all of you in this very fantastic speech and dialogue. So thank you, Professor Yang again. Thank you, Ms. Carmel. Thank you, Dr. Chris, and all our audience, Professor Cho, and our Faculty of Education, who make this event possible. So without all of you, I think this very important, valuable opportunity will not have been possible. So finally, I welcome all of you to this event and also wish you a very fruitful and enjoyable experience. So thank you for joining us today. And let's bring our shared vision today to our research and practices and commit ourselves to promoting excellence in education and ensuring that all of us will have the opportunity to succeed. So thank you.